on that literal basis. So when we look at Jupiter moving through the first house, and as I have a tendency to do when I talk about any archetype, I talk about the distortion of the archetype and I talk about the natural expression of it, because both can exist. And in evolutionary astrology, you must observe and correlate. You can't look at that little glyph on a circle chart on a piece of paper and know how it's going to manifest itself. You must have the interaction with the being to observe and correlate and see where exactly it is they are choosing to energize. And again, the dual desire nature, separating forces, returning forces. The distortions through the 12 houses will be similar to the separating forces having their influence. The natural expression of Jupiter and Scorpio through the 12 houses will be the returning force, making itself known. And it will be up to each of us to choose how we want to play with this energy. So when Jupiter in Scorpio transits through the first house, we can force our will upon others in order to meet our own desires, me over you. We can have all of the dominating situations, although we can be dominated if we feel weak enough through other things in our chart. We can have definitely manipulation of relationships and situations, because that first house energy and that intuitiveness of Jupiter is going to go to what's in it for me. We can have all the sexual games and distortions. The instinctive sexual energy comes through Aries first house Mars. We can, in its extremes, have selfishness. If there's nothing in it for me, I can't even bother to notice you exist. We can have anger build up to the point that it just comes raging out. And this is when Aries in first house doesn't have all the freedom that it wants to have to do whatever it wants in any situation. As I said before, we can be dismissive of others, especially after our own needs are met. There's none of that Libra polarity or seventh house polarity of the giving and receiving. It's all what's in it for me. So when Jupiter in Scorpio is distorted through the first house, we can have a whole lot of psychological manipulation. It can be instinctive, and sometimes they just don't even recognize they're doing it. And in some souls, they can be quite aware that they're doing it. And sooner or later, the pendulum swing of the universe is going to give them a psychic or a physical 2x4, as we have a tendency to say. If we want to look at Jupiter and Scorpio transiting through the first house and evolving in a natural expression, this is where we're going to utilize our psychological instinct and intuition for the betterment of all concerned. That's the polarity of the seventh house. We know what to do for ourselves, but we're going to have that morality or conscience that says, and how is this going to affect somebody else? And what am I going to do that makes it turn out best win-win for everyone? And because Jupiter and Scorpio can just in general be so psychologically astute, this transit, they're going to instinctively, they don't have a thought out plan, but when they're orientated towards being good and helpful and returning and, merging with others, they're just going to instinctively know how to help someone else, to know what's best to do in any situation. And they just do it. They're going to know when to initiate new endeavors. Their intuition is just going to say, it might be good to do it, when Mercury goes direct. They're going to have an ability to be very deeply self-honest. You know, Jupiter is truth versus lies. And Scorpio is turning that deep psychological eagle eye on it, something. And when it's the first house, it's ourself. And so they're not going to play games with themselves. They're going to own up to what needs to self-improve. And they're going to honor a need to be alone for spiritual questing. You know, Jupiter is always the expansion of our beliefs and our cosmology. And Scorpio is going to be doing it on a deep psychological level. And when it transits through the first house, it's not about having a party. They're going to have a certain percentage of alone time and the ability to honor that, to really have their deep intuitive connection to source arise from within, to be known, to honor it. This transit is going to have an ability to call out any BS, to use the polite word, bull, blah, blah. They're just going to, you know, they're going to have a real good BS meter, and they can call, in addition to calling themselves out when they're playing games or not being honest and truthful, they're going to be able to do that with everybody else. And it might be uncomfortable for others they're in relationship with. This transit is going to have the courage to be leaders, and they're going to have the courage to lead whether others follow or not. They're going to honor that instinct. This is what's best for me to do for myself and others. And they're going to have that Scorpio courage and just go do it. They're going to be honoring of freedom in others as well as themselves. Again, when Scorpio can't trust, it has to control that environment. It has to manipulate that environment. And when that is happening, there's no freedom. So when there is the self-trust and the self-reliance, then they can be a group of one. They can honor themselves, and they will honor that in others as much as within themselves. Now, to really go into all the details through the 12 houses, we would have a 2-week class. So I'm going to try and get it down into 2 hours. And I got a lot of Scorpio in my chart. So I'm quite psychologically orientated, and I have a lot of Sag in my chart. So I'm very spiritually orientated. So I'm going to be honing in on the psychology, spirituality as we go through these 12 houses. And hopefully wherever your interest lies, you can extrapolate that into the manifestation of how things can actually come through and work in some more detailed